20 years, 2 decades since Darren Lockyer, Shane Webcke, and plenty of other legends walked into a grand final against the Melbourne Storm and walked out premiers. Not with a blowout, not with flashy football, but with composure, toughness, and one of the most controlled grand final performances the club has ever produced. Brisbane 15, Melbourne 8. And here we are again. Broncos, Storm, in Melbourne, a rivalry that has shaped 2 decades of rugby league. G'day legends, and welcome back to the Old Skool Broncos Podcast. This isn't the weekly roundup show. This is where we dive a little deeper into the moments, the history, and the stories that shape the Brisbane Broncos. And this week's episode is a special one, because it's been 20 years since the 2006 premiership, a gritty grand final victory over the Melbourne Storm that delivered Brisbane their 6th title and closed the chapter on one of the greatest eras in club history. And fittingly, this weekend, the Broncos travel to Melbourne again to face the Storm, but the storylines don't stop there, because this match is also a rematch of the 2025 Grand Final, the night Brisbane ended the 19-year premiership drought by defeating the Melbourne Storm once again. So history is everywhere around this game. Let's wind the clock back. October 2006, Telstra Stadium in Sydney. The Broncos arrived in the grand final as a hardened, experienced side built around the leadership of Darren Lockyer, the power of Shane Webcke and Petro Civoniceva, and a backline capable of striking when the moment arrived. Across the field stood the rising Melbourne Storm, already stacked with names like Cameron Smith, Billy Slater, Cooper Cronk and Greg Inglis. Even then, everyone knew Melbourne were going to be a force for years to come. The game began exactly how grand finals should. It was tense, it was physical, every inch contested. The first points came from the boot of Darren Lockyer, who slotted a penalty goal to give Brisbane the early lead. But Melbourne struck back. A moment of brilliance from Scott Hill opened the Broncos' defence, and Steve Turner finished it off with a try that gave the Storm the advantage. Midway through the half, Lockyer did what the great playmakers do. He probed, held the defensive line, waited, then struck. Lockyer took the ball to the line and created just enough hesitation in the Melbourne defence before putting Justin Hodges through a gap to score. Hodges strolled over and Brisbane reclaimed the lead. From there, the match settled into a brutal arm wrestle. Big men colliding, kicking expertise everywhere, defensive lines refusing to break. Every tackle felt like it carried the weight of the premiership. The Storm came out of halftime with intent. They built pressure, they rolled through sets, and eventually the breakthrough came. In the 49th minute, Melbourne levelled the match when Matt King crossed for a try. Suddenly it was 8-8. The grand final was wide open. Momentum had shifted and Brisbane needed to steady themselves. That moment came through the boot of Corey Barker. The Broncos earned a penalty in attacking territory. Parker stepped up, calm and composed, and slotted the goal. Brisbane back in front 10-8. In a game like this, 2 points felt enormous, but the Broncos weren't finished. In the 62nd minute, Brisbane produced the play that ultimately sealed the match. A sweeping moment across the field, quick hands, precision timing, and on the edge, Brent Tate finishes it off in the corner. It was classic Broncos football, patient, controlled, and ruthless when the opportunity appeared. Now the Storm were chasing the game. And chasing the Broncos in a grand final is a difficult place to be. As the clock wound down, the captain delivered the final touch though. Darren Lockyer stepped in to a field goal position and calmly knocked over the one-pointer. The scoreboard read 15-8, and when the final siren sounded, the Broncos had done it. Premiers again for the 6th time. That grand final didn't just deliver another trophy. It closed a remarkable chapter in Broncos history. Shane Webcke walked off the field that night having played the final game of his career, and he did it with a premiership ring on his finger. The core of the side that had dominated through the early 2000s began to move on. And while Brisbane remained competitive for years, another title would not come quickly. It took 19 long years. So last season changed everything. The Broncos finally climbed that mountain again. And who was waiting for them in the grand final? Melbourne Storm. The rivalry that began in that 2006 decider had come full circle. When Brisbane lifted the trophy in 2025, it ended nearly 2 decades of waiting. For an entire generation of Broncos fans, it was the first time they had experienced that moment. The relief, the joy, the belief that the Broncos were back where they belong. Which brings us to this weekend. Brisbane have released a heritage jersey inspired by the strip worn in 2006. White, navy panels, maroon and gold trim. It's a design that instantly takes fans back. Back to Lockyer pulling the strings, back to Parker stepping up under pressure, back to Brent Tate diving into the corner. Back to Webke walking off a champion. But jerseys don't win games. Effort does. Belief does. Execution does. And this week presents a real challenge. The Storm have cruised through the opening rounds of the season. The system is humming as it always does. The Broncos, meanwhile, are still chasing their first win of the year, which means urgency is building. There's no panic, but there's pressure. Because Melbourne at home is one of the toughest assignments in rugby league. 20 years ago, the Broncos beat the Storm 15-8 to win the 2006 premiership. A few months ago, they beat the Storm in a grand final to end a 19-year drought. And this weekend, they meet again. A heritage jersey, a grand final rematch from last year, and a rivalry that has defined the modern era of the NRL. History says when Brisbane and Melbourne meet, it's never ordinary. But what are your thoughts? If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you like, subscribe, and share it with another Broncos tragic. This is the Old Skool Broncos Podcast. Let's go, Broncos.